Salamun alaikum, peace be upon you, and welcome back to Quranology Television, QGTV. The program is Chapter Studies, and the episode is episode 3 or Chapter 3 Ali Imran. So we're following a program for Ramadan 2011, and we're trying to do a portion of the Quran each day so that we can finish the Quran by the end of Ramadan. Today we'll be doing chapter 3 or Ali Imran. Ali Imran is one of the biggest chapters in the Quran and the third chapter in terms of sequence. Yesterday I said that Ali Imran is the twin of Al-Baqarah, and upon reading Ali Imran again today I found that there is a case for that. The first case to prove that the first point to prove that Ali Imran and Baqarah are twins is that both begin with Alif Lam Mim. Those are the muqatta'at, and they start each chapter, Baqarah and Ali Imran, with a certain tone. Another thing is that Baqarah and Ali Imran both have a preamble. Now let me explain what I mean by that. Before Al-Baqarah begins with the first call to mankind, that's in verse 21, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people. There are 20 verses beforehand which give you a preamble of the basic personality types. As I said yesterday, the muttaqeen and the kafirin. With Ali Imran, there is also a preamble which begins before the story of Isa. The story of Isa begins in verse 35. And before that, for 34 verses, from Alif Lam Mim up to verse 34, there is a preamble. Now what is that preamble about? Well, it begins first by telling us about Allah's attributes. He is Al-Hayyul Qayyum. He is the one who's ever living and ever establishing. He gives you iqamah. He's Qayyum. So then he continues to link that with Al-Kitab, and also Tawrat and Injil and Furqan. So these are states which you achieve in your life by establishing God's laws. So Tawrat is a state of action, and Injil is a state in which you will see growth. So that's in the early part of Ali Imran. Then it continues to talk about the temptations which we have. Then it continues to talk about, for example, like in verse 20, it tells you what Islam is about. It says, Kul aslamtu wajhiya lillah. Say, I submit my whole self to Allah. So, then Islam becomes a central aspect of its theme. So, indeed, this early preamble is important for us to understand what exactly the theme of Ali Imran is. And to me, the theme of Ali Imran is Islam. We're not talking about Islam as we see it in the world, but rather the concept of Islam in the Quran. Ali Imran is the first detailed exposition of the concept of Islam. If we agree to that, and obviously I'm not saying that is necessarily true, it's just my perception at this point, but if we agree to that, then we must try to read the rest of the chapter in accordance with that view. Let's take, for example, the story of Isa, which is from verse 35 to verse 63. The story of Isa is essentially the story of one who establishes God's system, which is Al-Kitab, Al-Tawrat, Al-Injil, and Al-Hikmah, to such an extent that Allah says to him, Inni mutawaffiyuka wa rafi'uka ilayya. Verily I complete you and raise you to me. That's in chapter 3, verse 55. So the story of Isa is very intimately linked with the establishment of Islam in the world. This does not mean to say that Isa is a chosen prophet or some other implications which may allude to Christianity, but rather Isa in the Quran has a specific purpose and implication, and that's the implication, the establishment of Islam. And the establishment of Isa's Islam is complete from spirituality all the way to a physical establishment, and he leads Bani Israel in that way. So now that takes us to verse 64. Verse 64 addresses Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the Kitab. I'm not going to translate Kitab. So here we need to ask, what is the Kitab? Well, according to the context, I mean, we've just been reading verses 35 to 63. So according to the context, Kitab refers to the story of Isa. And these people who have been included in this story, or included in Isa's system, they are making a challenge about Ibrahim, and Allah is answering that challenge. That you can read from verses 64 to 69. Verse 70 is a single verse passage which asks the Ahl al-Kitab why they reject something which they witness. So they are witnessing the system of Isa in place, yet they reject it. Then we move on to verse 71 to verse 99, which talks about again the Ahl al-Kitab, and here God tells us the formula for establishment of Isa's system, which is the bite of Ibrahim's system itself, which is bibakah, or with extreme sorrow and tears. And this is the criteria for the establishment of the bite. And whoever follows this bite, Allah says, "Man dakhalahu kana amina." Whoever enters it will attain peace and security. Now the first call to the mu'mineen, the believers, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, and talks about their relationship with the Ahl al-Kitab. So they are also in the Kitab, or in the system with the Ahl al-Kitab, but Allah is addressing them separately because they actually believe in the system, whereas the Ahl al-Kitab may or may not believe. So belief here becomes a criteria. From verse 102 to 117, so 102 to 117, it talks to believers and their role in that system. So essentially it includes verses like to do amr bil ma'ruf wa naha anil munkar, which is to command with what is recognized and forbid that which is unrecognized, and essentially their role in making the system uppermost. Then we have verse 118 to 129, which is still to believers, but it talks about their relationship with the hypocrites of the system. So there are people who are in the system, they are munafiqeen, so they are spending in the way of the system, but they don't really believe, and so they become a liability to the system. Verse 130 to 148 is the next segment, and it talks about economic oppression, or riba. So verse 130 itself starts with La ta'kulu riba, do not consume the fruits of labor which are oppressive. And it talks about spending in the way of God to attain the system's survival. The verse which talks about Muhammad, where Muhammad is mentioned for the first time, is in this passage, verse 144. So at that point in time, you can imagine that Allah addresses the Prophet by the name Muhammad, which shows that the name Muhammad actually means one who invokes hamd, praise, joy. So that is when the system has attained that level. Then we come to verse 149 to 155, where the rejectors of the system. So we're not talking about the Islamic State. Okay, we're talking about a system which elevates mankind by oppressing, by going against economic oppression. And verse 149 to 155, the rejectors of this system are to be dealt with and to be stopped. So in other words, we must stop those who propagate economic oppression. Then we have a very long passage, verse 156 to 199, so almost to the end, where it talks about the believers and their ethos with respect to the system. So they must be completely committed to the system. And then the end verse is verse. So now we come to the absolute end of Ali Imran, and it is another single word passage where it says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O ye who have believed. Believed in what? The entire chapter now. It's talking about the entire chapter. So if you've believed in everything that's been said, if you find security in this, then it says, Asbiru, be patient, be durable, be persistent. Wasabiru, again, an emphasis, be patient, be durable, be persistent. Warabitu, and fortify. See, again it goes back, fortify. What do you fortify against? You fortify against forces of destruction, forces of entropy. So here it says, fortify, warabitu, wattaqallah, and be mindful of Allah. Take guard against Allah, because Allah will provide you the test. So you must always be mindful. لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, that you may be prospering or prosperous. Now, where have we seen this word tuflihun? Well, if we go back to our previous reading of Al-Baqarah, which is chapter 2, and we look at verse 5, it says, أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَىٰ هُدًى مِّن رَبِّهِمْ, those are the people on guidance from their Lord. It's talking about verses 1 to verse 4 now. And verse 5 says, أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَىٰ هُدًى مِّن رَبِّهِمْ, those are the people on the guidance from their Lord. وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ, and they are the ones who are prosperous. So Al-Baqarah approximately begins with Al-Falah or Muflihun, and Ali Imran closes with لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, that you may be prosperous. So here we can see a link which brackets the two chapters. Not exactly, but approximately. So if we read Baqarah and Ali Imran as two organic parts to a whole, perhaps we will have a new insight into these two chapters. That brings us to a close of chapter 3, and inshallah tomorrow we will proceed to chapter 4. I hope you've benefited from my humble exposition. Comments and criticisms always welcome. Have a pleasant evening. Bye.